this was an organization that really cared about their people. And when that started changing over time, I gave notice and left and broke multi-years on a contract to say, no, to me, vision is important. And if I don't believe and care in it. So when I tell people, no, if you don't fit, it's okay. There's a place you will. They think I don't have any meat behind it. Oh, no, I do. I walked away from a lot. But what I always looked at was what I walked to, which was just awesome. Continuing a journey where I can be aligned with the vision and help to really be a storyteller within the organization. Or as CEO, I was the storyteller of the organization. Vulnerability based trust needs to be at that leadership team level. And then over time, it rolls through the organization and you help it do that. When you have vulnerability based trust, that trust that is all about us being able to say, ooh, that's on me, or I'm wrong, or maybe I wasn't thinking about that. That trust, that's that hard thing to say. I'm not going to be political and say I'm always right. Heck, I'm not always right. I've been wrong today, I'm sure already.
Yeah.
And so it's when you have that, then you can have healthy conflict. Now everybody can step up and you're not dancing on eggshells, right? You're not expecting to hurt feelings because this is about our team. This isn't about, each of us. This is about all of us.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, John Moncrief. And my guest today is someone I first met at a Small Giants conference in Detroit. And I remember sitting there completely locked into what she was saying. It's not just what she's done, but how she's done it. The determination, the clarity, the conviction to stand up for what's right, even when it's not easy. So my guest, Amy Courter, is a lifelong volunteer and a former national commander and CEO of the Civil Air Patrol. That's the civilian auxiliary of the US Air Force, where she served as a 2-star Major General, leading over 61,000 volunteers across emergency services, cadet programs, and aerospace education. That alone would be reason enough to have her on the show, but Amy's story doesn't stop there. From being employee number 121,633 in a massive tech firm to helping take a private company public, from leading at the Pentagon to coaching entrepreneurial teams today as an EOS implementer. Amy's worn so many hats and been in so many different leadership roles. I had to get on the show. And underneath all of this is this consistent thread from a values, service, and a drive to create real impact. So in this episode, Amy and I talk about why values matter and how to tell when a company's no longer living them. We also talk about how to create healthy conflict and build team trust in leadership team settings, and what it really means to lead with vision and how to keep moving after you've reached a mountaintop, how to go on to the next mountaintop or the next big thing in your business. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode with Amy. Amy, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on finally. I've been looking forward to this and really excited for our conversation.
I've been looking forward to it as well. Thank you.
So we were talking just before I hit the record button, we were talking about the roles you filled and how many roles you filled. But something I really admire about you, and having listened to you speak at Small Giants, is your leadership abilities. And I'm really interested in and really curious about where that came from, where this calling to serve and being a leader came from, and how that kind of affected your career trajectory.
Well, backing up probably farther than you wanted to, although, I do have a bear in the background, stuffed bear, so maybe that sent me back to my childhood. But I think that some of it was just where I grew up. I grew up in a neighborhood. We were on a dead-end dirt road, and everybody had gardens in the backyard. Some people had garden hoses. We had buckets and arms, and so one of the things that I recognized, I was kind of between the ages of all the kids around me, and so there were a group of guys that were probably 2-3 years older than I, and some a little bit younger. And then there were only a couple of girls. One was my age, but I swear she never came out of her house. And a couple of them that were older and younger. And I had a sister 5 years older, 5 years younger. So I kind of was that in between, kid. And I think, as I looked at our neighborhood and we were all, going to stay there together, nobody ever left. And I think that some of what I learned was how to get along with a lot of different people and even
Yeah.
later bring them together more. So not just, coexist, but kind of help people to do that. And so I was never, the strongest of the kids playing sports because there were guys that were, inches taller than I and stronger and older. And I was never, and I was always careful with those that were younger. And so I kind of, had a bunch of people that just started, the younger kids just started following me around because I could get along with them and we could offer to play basketball or whatever and just really get engaged. And I think that really shaped who I became because I was a very quiet kid, but I knew, gosh, we have to do something to be able to, there's one basketball court in the neighborhood, one. And so, and it was on somebody's garage, so we had to play well. But I think that helped me a lot to see how to work with others.
How old were you back then?
So I'm thinking of when I was like, oh my gosh, probably 9, 10, 11, 12. Just kind of, wanted to be out and about, loved to play sports and different things. In fact, it's kind of funny. Fast forward to college, I never thought of playing basketball because I was playing basketball with guys that were 6 inches taller than I was, and I was more the Harlem Globetrotters style, of playing, with crazy antics so that you could actually make a basket while people didn't expect you to. And they put me in college and said, no, we want you to play. I'd played field hockey. So the athletic director's like, get over here, sign up for basketball. I was 5'9" and grew actually during college even more. My mom thought it was something they were giving us, feeding us
Oh,
just in
wow.
case.
Yeah.
And, and it was funny. They put me in as a forward and I'm standing up as a forward up. I'm so close to the basket. I'm hitting off the backboard and it's flying away because I've never been that close to the backboard before. And it was, and I literally, they realized I have a great outside shot, but I didn't used to get into the middle of it. So it's kind of funny how things shape the way you think and act
And
along
how
along
things
your
come
journey.
together. Yeah. I mean, when you
Yeah.
talk about that, I think back to that same age when I was 9, 10, kind of 11, growing up in neighborhood. We were in New Hampshire, and I think though that time sort of shaped my values. And I know
Mm.
my mom's license plate or my parents' license plate had "live free or die," and this kind of value of freedom came through. And the
Yes.
garage sales and the lemonade sale kind of stuff, and that was this entrepreneurial kind of spirit, and was just starting at that time. And then the space shuttle kind of coming in and landing piggyback on the 747, and this amazing feeling of freedom at that time. And it's funny how that sticks with you from that age. Is
Yes. In fact, I think they first stepped onto the moon when I was 8 years old, if I remember right. And I remember this evening, and we were my mom was having us, change up the living room. We're moving everything and vacuuming under everything and putting it back in a new place so we could trip over it because we'd forgotten. And we were in the middle of all that, and some of the furniture was actually out on our front lawn, and because my mom we were cleaning the rugs, and my mom all of a sudden hollered, just called for us to come outside. And all of us thought, oh no, something like she fell or I mean, something crazy happened because of the way she said, wait, get out here. And so we all like scrambled outside. And my mom's standing there pointing at the moon. Now it was still, it was evening, but still visible. She points up at the moon, and we're, my sisters and I are looking at each other. And and I'm sure my dad was like, uh-oh. And we said, yeah, mom, like that's the moon. It's, you know what? You'll see it there tomorrow. It'll move a little, but, and she said, no, 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 stop and look. So we all faithfully stopped to look. And she said, because tomorrow it's going to have footprints on it.
Oh, wow.
And I remember just the way like that, those kinds of things where you're like, oh yeah. And when you said 8, I'm like, oh yeah, that's, when I was thinking about the way that those things so far away, she wanted to bring into where we were. It was fun.
Wow. And just, I mean, that kind of, I could feel the sort of goosebumps. We'll have steps on the moon there tomorrow. It is, I mean, when
Yeah.
you put it that way, it's quite an amazing way of thinking of it.
Yes. Yep.
Your parents played a big role in your values, and your mom and your dad. Your dad was very entrepreneurial. Maybe
Mhm.
just kind of give us a sense of how that played into your values and shaped you.
Yes. Yeah, my dad just, oh my gosh, loved, he had multiple businesses in but construction and kind of formed together. And grew up outside Flint, Michigan, but his offices, his work was in the city of Flint. And it was just interesting because I equated entrepreneurial with working like mad. My dad, and especially in the summers, 18-hour days. If I wanted to spend any time with him, I had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get his bowl of cornflakes ready to go. And which I did. And then he would be home really late at night, and I would be sitting on the back steps to say hi. And so, I always thought, oh my gosh, I loved how much he cared, his compassion, his and passion just for what he did. We'd he'd stop, and again, like my mom would point at something. We're like, yeah, Dad, that's the Fisher Body, factory. And he's like, no, Amy, I just put an awning on that for the entrance. Oh, okay. Like he would, really make sure, you were
That's
recognizing,
yeah.
the hey, I go to work, but this is the stuff I do. And so, yeah, that entrepreneurial just heart really meant a lot to me. And my mom also had started a community education program in our little rural town where I went to school. I was right between Flint and Swartz Creek. And she had done that by asking for one of the notable Flint philanthropists for money to do that. And so my parents were both very much that way. But I also remembered, like, oh my goodness, I didn't equate that to always living a great life too. Like we
Yeah.
did, but my goodness, my parents were busy. Even my mom is only as a volunteer, and she would say only a volunteer, and we'd say, Mom, you're a volunteer that's making a difference. Um, but so, in my thinking, it was, well, let's go on to university, see what else we can do. And the reality is I very quickly pivoted right back to entrepreneurial life, because that's what I love. I love making a difference, caring about my clients, the work that I do, making sure we're watching and celebrating it. So it all comes back to that.
Because where you are right now is an EOS coach implementer. Um,
Hmm.
so you look after business owners and leadership teams and help them to grow and scale their businesses and look after their business and put an operating system into the business.
Yes. Yeah.
But you
I
started
love.
off, yeah, sorry, you love?
Go ahead. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
did
Yeah, I was going to say I love to really just help others do what they want to do better, and sometimes do what they don't even think they can do. Like I love expanding the dream at the point where things that seem out of their reach become in their reach. Now they can do the next thing.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I love working with owners and leadership teams to do what they want to do better.
And your career started in tech many years ago when you were sort of 22. So it wasn't an immediately entrepreneurial role, so to speak. You went into I guess, the corporate environment. I think you employ 100 and something thousand. I think I probably got the number wrong.
Yeah, it was,
It's big.
yeah, 120, yeah, I think it was 121,633 was my employee number, so that'll tell you something. But yeah, and that was when I really thought, like, wow, this is it. Like I'm joining this huge organization, and really getting to again make a difference. I went to when I went to college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because I loved a lot of things. So I chose a liberal arts degree because I could, take classes in, psychology and education, the social sciences, and as well as the hard sciences, computer science. I also had a math minor, and just that ability to have that variation and
Yeah.
distribution of things. So got a chance to go to France when I was a third year, and spent my year there in France, in Strasbourg, France, in a French university, in another language. Oh my goodness. And one for which most of the people around me had far more training than I. But I always say, harder I work, the luckier I get. I got a great opportunity to go there. But that ability then to say, well, okay, so now I could go and do anything. And oh, by the way, I have a lot of loans, so I'm going to get a good job. And I thought about teaching, but honestly, the teaching jobs weren't there at that point, and I knew
Yeah.
I had a lot to pay back. So as I was applying for teaching jobs, before I even got out of college, before I graduated, I had an opportunity come up to be a programmer operator and to work in that role, and then got picked up by that large manufacturer. They were the rival to IBM, and about the same size. In fact, many of the things today in PCs and things like that, the operating systems really came from the operating systems of that first company that I was in. Um, but that entrepreneur didn't see the best way to continue to grow, which is something also to really remember. You can absolutely grow and scale if that's what you want to do, but boy, you have to really think about it. And it's another reason I think I really love small giants, where people just want to be their best,
Yeah.
whatever that means to them, and it isn't really about just scale and
A growth for the sake of
all the
growth.
time.
When you reflect on that and you look back now on where you are and you're coaching and working with leadership teams, and you think back to that time working with that owner who maybe didn't quite get it, what was missing back then?
Often we tend to, think we can, we look at history and history is a great measuring stick for us, right? Look back to see where we've been, but people don't always think, well, if I've come that far, look how much farther I can still go. And so I find that we limit ourselves. I love, and there's positive intelligence, PQ,
Yeah.
that people will talk about, just being able to think that, I mean, I remember, this is a crazy story, but at one point I was the young careerist. So obviously a long time ago, I'm the old careerist now. I was a young careerist in an organization. They recognized me. I went all the way to the national level, gave this presentation to thousands of people in Niagara Falls, New York. Scared the heck out of me. It was great. And in that organization, though, they then said, I just felt really compelled to help them. I mean, they had helped me in presentations and all kinds of things, recognizing my career. And at the time, newspapers were still very much a thing. So I had all these local newspapers and even beyond local, recognizing me for that. And so I'm a member of the organization, and I saw something that really, it was coming up on its 75th anniversary, and it's the Business and Professional Women's Organization. So if you think about it, in Michigan in 1919 in Detroit, three women got together to go have lunch. Doesn't seem like a big deal. In 1919, women should have had a male escort to go to lunch in a
Chaperone.
restaurant. So chaperone, yeah. So it was a big deal. And so 75 years later, I happen to see, oh my gosh, I'm at the 75th anniversary of this organization. That's pretty awesome. And I got to meet some of the folks who had made a difference over time. And I thought, we should do something about seeing, again, much like I do with my clients today, where can this go? Like, it was clear where we'd been, but
Yeah.
where can it go? One of the women who was the Michigan and then national president had been on President Nixon's first commission on women. And so, you just see all these places, and I'm thinking, what are we doing now? What can we do? And so I got together with a few folks and thought about how we could nationally work, because it was the national 75th. And so we created basically a project plan and a group. And I realized if I needed funding to get people together, long before, getting together like this across continents, Jean, right, is really a thing. And so, I put this plan together, and then I had to go in and present because I needed some seed money, about $10,000, but it was all going to come back.
Yeah.
And so I because we were going to fundraise and things. So I put this plan together, went to meet with the executives from the Michigan board, which I hoped would support the funding. And everybody's significantly older, and I'm always presume wiser than I. And I went in with, in my skirted suit with my, my briefcase still in those days. And I went in to present this plan, and I had handouts, and I'm presenting this, and I'm getting all kinds of appropriate, I think, by the way, feedback or pushback. Well, Amy, what if this? Or, well, what about that? And oh my goodness. And hey, have you talked to? Yes, I have. And so at the point where it just was kind of hitting the crescendo of me thinking, this is heading in the wrong direction a little too quickly right now. I said, they asked another question, and I said, you know how I know this is going to be successful? And I opened my briefcase and I pulled out my copy of a book, the little train that could,
Yes.
right? And I sat it on top of my briefcase, so it's sitting up so they can see the title of it. And they're all looking around the room at each other because who is this young child? Okay, I wasn't, but making fun of us. And I said, I want to be clear. This is going to happen because when I say things are going to happen, when I put my mind to it, when I work with teams, we figure out how to do it because it's not about if, it's just when. It's not about exactly where we're going to get to. It's about the journey as well. And this is going to be a good journey for our organization to really contemplate. And got a little bit more pushback, and thank goodness I always have plan B. I took the book off my briefcase, opened my briefcase, and sat on top a bottle of Tums. And I said, and if nothing else, I'll just eat some antacids. We'll be fine because we're going to make this happen. I need $10,000. So how is someone willing to support a motion to, provide for us the seed money of $10,000? And amongst this group, in fact, the one who may have even been the most vocal in opposition made the motion, and it was unanimous. And they left me in the room. They brought me back in the room, I should say, because they sent me out of the room. And I'm optimistically in the hallway, and I came back in, and they said it was unanimous. And I heard the motion in the second before I left. And anyway, it was awesome. But it's times like that where we just have to believe in ourselves enough to help others believe with us. So not that I'm in organizations with my clients, but I do feel as though I'm there with them, and they should always feel like they can reach out to me at any time, good or bad. And so I love that ability to really get my head in their game, that my thoughts with their organization, and help them to see the possibilities. Having said that, remember, I led 61,000 people in emergency management,
Yeah.
disaster relief, search and rescue. So everything's not always pretty, but knowing that I always think about I hope for the best, plan for the best, but I also look for the worst and plan to make sure we know how to mitigate the worst. And I think it's that balance. I'm sure people will say I'm an optimist. I'm actually probably much more of a realist because I do look at both sides. But then, for crying out loud, if you're going to desire one or the other, go for the win.
Go for the win. I mean, just so reflecting or thinking about it, you've held positions as CEO, CIO, CIE. I remember we were talking about this
Yeah.
the last time
Yeah.
across very different organizations, so military,
Yes.
corporate, and very different leadership roles. But
Mhm.
if I'm hearing you properly, that vision is such a critical thing, being able to see where it is that you want to go, and then being a bit persistent about getting there and just sort of staying the course rather than being too easily pulled in different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Vision is critical. And, I can think all the way back to, those where we first started with, being a kid and trying to get, our neighborhood not to, have turf wars, literally, and over the basketball court I wanted to play on. And, and so, it's that thinking of, hey, look at where we can go together. Look at what we can do and have the possibility of doing. And hey, if that's not you, it's okay. Like,
Yeah.
there are great people who do things that are very different than I would do them, or very different than a leadership team may want to go. That's fine. But what's important is to make sure if you've got folks on your team that they're lined up and they know where you're going and why. As I often tell my teams, and sometimes I think about it, the leadership teams when they've just really achieved something. I'm like, wow, you feel like you're on the top of the mountaintop right now, don't you? You just doubled your profit margin. Like, this is crazy, right? This is amazing. And you didn't do it by raising prices and by, cutting people and laying folks off. You did
Mm.
it through figuring out the best ways to improve, to be more efficient and effective. And as a result of that, here we are celebrating. But don't forget, we're at the top of the mountain, right? They say, yes. And I say, you know what the view is like from here? And they're like, oh my gosh, it's lovely. I said, yeah, until you get back to work. And then where are you looking? Everywhere is downhill from here. I said, so get your eyes back on the next mountaintop. Like, we need to decide what's next before we leave today, or else everything is just going to be downhill. So I think that's the vision is just so important to share and to get shared. And being able to, to tell that story. And when I work with teams, I talk about leading and managing. So it's got to be both, so that, leading is really directionally, where are we headed and why? And, then we'll get to the how and the management and the what we need to see each week to get there.
But it's getting that overall kind of vision, direction, that's where we're going, right? And making sure everything that lines up properly, and that we're all moving in the same direction to get where we want to go. And I guess sometimes whether it's a quarter and you're celebrating and you're at the top of top of the kind of mountain, if you haven't got the eye on where you need to go by the end of the year or the next quarter or further out, you're sort of at risk of downhill, as you say. And so many businesses hit that
Yeah.
plateau, get stuck there, and they just don't see where they're going next. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's
And
keep climbing.
Yeah, and whether it's they can't see, haven't said it, sometimes it's having that belief or fortitude that that wasn't it. That wasn't our last hurrah. That there's more that we can do, and I do think that it's important to help teams to find that. Not to keep celebrating, but but also ensure that you've got the path ready to go forward. One of the things that I have always done, in fact, I realized that well, what was great was when I was in that technology company, I had a lot of different engagements. I was kind of the Jill of all trades. I had a lot of different opportunities to, go help. There's an issue in sales over there. What? Me, sales? Go help. There's an issue with their network. Okay, I've installed networks. Go help. There's an issue with their software. Okay, I'm a programmer. And so I would go and have shorter stints, which turns out I'm so lucky because that's what I love. And if I had a 6-month assignment somewhere programming one thing, I would probably poke my eye out. And so that ability for me to be in different places led me to an entrepreneurial business. Probably 100 people, literally were struggling with the technology they put in, million, multi-million, I know $1 million plus at least way back then and decades ago. And I went in to help with the hardware, ended up working on the network, ended up having programmers ask me questions like, hey, do you know that? Or I was kind of overhearing an issue in the cubicles and I helped with it. And they looked at me like, you know that too. And I'm like, I'm just like, I've done a number of things. I love to learn. So I'm happy to share. And so over time, then I realized how much their values that were visible. They were on walls way back when people didn't do that often. They
Yeah.
didn't share their core values. They didn't share all of that. And so I joined that company, and that's how I went from big company to a privately held company, a family business actually, to then uh, moving into that company. We ended up taking to the New York Stock Exchange. We IPO'd and took it public. So then I led 2 divisions of that, and we had global presence and alignment. And again, I'm now sharing the vision that came from the top, but it's still one that I need to really work on so that my team understands it. Because as you get larger, I think in fact we had a core value that it was awesome. It was get bigger, behave smaller.
Nice.
And that was really true. This was a small giant. This was an organization that really cared about their people. And when that started changing over time, I gave notice and left and broke multi-years on a contract to say, no, to me, vision is important. And if I don't believe and care in it, so when I tell people, no, if you don't fit, it's okay. There's a place you will. They think I don't have any meat behind it. Oh no, I do. I walked away from a lot, but what I always looked at was what I walked to, which was just awesome. Continuing a journey where I can be aligned with the vision and help to really be a storyteller within the organization. Or as CEO, I was the storyteller of the organization.
And you have to tell that
And
story until it echoes back at you. You got to just keep
yeah,
sort of selling it and telling it, and until it comes back at you.
yes.
But
Yeah, and what I always look for coming back is that I see people doing it. They're making decisions in the field, if you will, the frontliners, others every day. And I sometimes call those micro decisions because they don't even think about them as decisions, but they're things that they're doing. Do I improve this a little bit more? I'm not sure if it's really going to be valuable for the client, or do I not? How do they decide that? Well, it depends what your values and your vision tell them. And so, yeah, I think it's so important for us to echo.
you joined that company because of its value. So you were with a much bigger organization, and they
Hmm.
were a client of yours, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And you actually felt like the values aligned with your values, and that was really important for you. And then
Yes.
ultimately, what you're saying is down the line, the values of that organization or the people leading the organization weren't sort of true to the values anymore, which for you was a problem. and
Yeah.
ultimately meant you left.
Absolutely. And it was 20 years. So,
Yeah,
you could say, across that time, we were now on the, I guess, third CEO since then, and things are different. So, yeah, I think whatever the amount of time, whatever the words, and but I really looked at words and actions. Were the words the same? Absolutely. They were on every annual report. They were on the wall still. They were on the wall of many,
yeah,
organizations or many buildings across the globe. But we weren't living them. In other words, what I was seeing, being in some executive meetings and things, is we weren't making decisions that lined up with that. And that's really what I think about, which actually has me really, that's why I really think about the frontliners. It's decisions they're making. And that's what we're trying to align, is the decision making in the organization, so that everything we're doing is heading us toward the vision that we say and believe that we will achieve.
yeah. And I mean, I guess what I'm curious about is how, or do you still struggle with some business owners and leadership teams to help them to really grasp the importance of core values and that vision. I think back to, in terms of EOS and reading the book the first time many years ago with Rob Dubé, and him saying, well, can we leave this fluffy stuff to later? I think is kind of how he puts it in the book, but how Gino pushed him to, you need to get these core values sorted out. Do you still encounter that same resistance?
Yes, I think I often may encounter more resistance about uh, just not changing core values, because I think that the book, I think initially 2011 is the copyright date on the version I have anyway. And you think back then, how many people, how many organizations espoused their core values, really talked about them. Not quite as many. Military always has
Yeah,
excellent service, respect, and so that ability, though, for the organizations to really look at those and ensure. So when I come in, I teach, facilitate, and coach as a certified EOS implementer. I'm not a business advisor, but boy, have I run a lot of businesses. Absolutely, I'm still owner, co-owner of some. That's not why I'm there. I'm there because I know which questions to ask
yeah,
to generate the ideas. So I'm asking the generative questions that really get the answers from the room, because they're not my answers. Some of my clients would choose to do things very differently than I would. That's not mine to question. I'll just ensure that they are thinking about all the components of and the consequences of where they're going. And so I often will have teams who say, we've had those values for a long time. We're good. And I'll say, okay, great. I love that. This will speed up our day. Aren't you thrilled about this? This is great. So let's test those. Let's pressure test those. And so I'll spend some time still doing the same thing I would have done anyway to discover those. And then as we do that, we recognize that I've never had a team who didn't change something. And sometimes it's whole scale changing. But what
yeah,
they're doing is also getting that shared vision. That's what's different. Somebody came up with the values. Maybe even it was a team. Heck, it could have been a subcommittee in the organization. People love doing that. Hey, let's have our people tell us. And I say, well, be careful. That's how you get accidental values, the values they want, not necessarily the values the organization needs to be its best, right? So hang on, like, this usually starts from the top and goes down. And as we discover those, then we play I always joke, my favorite EOS game show, Keep Kill Combine, and we get so that we have not just what a handful of words that are the values, but also we start defining what those are because of how we bring them together. And I think that's kind of the magic of having someone like me, in the room to facilitate that, is that they then really get to come together and have healthy conflict about what they really meant by that. So even if they have some of the same words as the values themselves, they're often putting different definitions and much clearer definition of what it is, and of what they want to define how that team is going to work together. So yeah, couldn't be more important. And I have teams that have everything from profanity and core values to Bible verses and core values. I'm just always careful not to schedule the two sessions side by side because I might not change my vocabulary properly, but that ability to just let them be who they are, I think,
Yeah.
also speaks volumes to the EOS process. It's just an operating system. It's not. It's just like anything else. It's everything they do. Their apps, what they do is just going to ride on top of it. This is just something that holds all of that space for them.
What holds leadership teams back from finding the growth and momentum they're looking for at the moment? Even when you're implementing EOS, where do you see the challenges that seem to hold some teams back from moving forward?
Yes, I say, we say that, we develop the vision, we find great ways to help them, again, in teaching, facilitating, coaching them to garner accountability, which is through leadership and management. And also we continue to just elevate team health. And it's often the team health, if we think about it from the standpoint of, organizations where maybe there's many are fear based, right? In fact, they make their
Yeah.
decisions based on fear, and so they're making decisions to ensure that bad thing doesn't happen to them. Well, if as they do that as organizations, they do that as individuals. Well, I'm not going to speak up because I don't want a bad thing to happen to me, and I'm that crazy person who again, I long before I left that organization I spoke about where we weren't really living the values the same way. Our decision making wasn't in line with it. I had that conversation 10 times, literally. I can tell you at least 10 times, because I would intentionally say, here's what I thought we were going to do based on what this value says. Here's what we did do. Help me.
Yeah.
What am I missing? Because every once in a while, right, you'll be missing something like, oh, here's the other. Oh, okay, great, thank you, right? On the other hand, when it's like, yeah, no, we're just not going to do that. I say, great, then let's fix this. Let's fix the values so that we do know where we're going. Because otherwise, we're heading this direction. Our teams are heading in that direction because that's what we say on paper, and we're just making ourselves, really less and less productive, efficient, and potentially healthy. And so that team health really is an important part. And we have to have people be willing to be open and honest and vulnerable. And
Yeah.
so when I'm looking at potential clients and I'm vetting them, I will rarely tell you, I say, oh my gosh, they're going to be open, honest, vulnerable. Life is good. This will be such a great client. My great clients, I love a challenge. So I'll say that my great clients are those that aren't there yet. And most teams aren't. They may have a great vision, but not execute it. They may have execution, not have a great vision, or not have team health. So there's always something missing. And if there's not, I'm like, handing them some books and patting them on the head and sending them on their way and telling me to call me if they ever need me. I really want to make sure that I help teams to gain that health, which starts with the leaders.
Yeah.
It starts with the leaders being willing to tell the owner the emperor has no clothes. And being able, as the book goes, nobody wants to tell the owner, the emperor, that
Yeah.
they don't have clothes on, right? And that ability for us to, I always say, praise in public, criticize in private. Have those conversations in spaces that enable people to really be humble and take some thought around it and ask questions. But creating that team health, and that's such a blessing. Like, it's such a force multiplier in Air Force speak that when you have team health, anything that you run into, you're going to figure out, because your team's not going to be saying, well, I don't know, should I say that? Because that's not going to be popular. It's no longer then about popular. It's really about the genuine care and concern for our people and where we're going as an organization for the greater good of the organization. And so then it makes it easier to make those decisions. They're not politicized. People are willing to speak up even when it's tough. And I always say, when people speak up like that, those are gifts. They might be badly wrapped. They might be yelling at us, but it's still a gift. We still
Yeah.
should be saying thank you, taking that information, really, getting to the root of it, figuring out what we need to do, and getting strong and healthier. So teams that get healthier and healthier over time, I think are much more resilient. They're just more sustainable as an organization, because somebody will, call out the issue and point to something they need to worry about and start acting on it.
So as particularly as business owners and founders of the business, we've got to create that space for our people to be vulnerable as much as we ourselves need to be vulnerable, but
Yeah.
give them that space to really kind of say what's on their mind and unpack it, not just note or acknowledge it, but really
Yeah.
unpack it. And there's so much gold that's going to come through from those conversations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that ability, and I'll tell you, I mean, I know I certainly went through times in my life where I'm like, gosh, do I point that out? Do I speak up? Employee 121,633, here for duty, to tell you that something's wrong. I could just be squished. I'm just a tiny ant in that whole thing, and yet I would speak up. I would go to my manager and say, I'm seeing this, and is that going to be an issue? And ultimately why it was easier for me to leave behind a company car and an expense account and a credit card and all kinds of fun stuff and um, different projects that really I was just thrilled to have the opportunity to pursue, to go to that entrepreneurial business where what they said is what they did, and how they said they cared was how they cared. And so for me, that knowing that I was still willing to speak up, and I had a great manager who was willing to listen, and we did some great things as a result. In fact, we got recognized for some programs and things that we did in our unit that the unit next to us would have been probably scared to try to
to do.
step into. So yeah, so I remember not recognizing as much then as I certainly do now how that manager really supported me, and he was sticking his neck up, above where mine was, So,
I mean, there was
but yeah,
something
it's
else I noticed about you, and when I listened to you speak at the Small Giants event not long ago, was
yeah,
basically standing up for what's right and standing up
yes,
for other people around you. Um, and I think I feel like, particularly for women, they're far better at negotiating on behalf of others than for sort of
mm,
negotiating on their own behalf. And one of the things that
mm,
came through from what you were saying, and I saw news, that didn't matter which way you were standing up for. You almost weren't scared to stand up for what was right, whether it was something that you believed in or for somebody else, which I truly admired. But yeah,
yeah. I
very,
think I think it's important, and well, and to what you said, it is always easier for me to stand up for somebody else. I tend to be the person who says, okay, yeah, I'm one of that class, or whatever, I'm one of that group, I'll stand up. But that ability to really care enough about others to
yeah,
do that, and inevitably you got to care enough about yourself. You're not going to be in a great position to get things done and do what you need to do if you're not doing some advocating for yourself as well when needed. But I have spent so much of my life and career advocating for somebody else, the two teams of basketball players in the neighborhood, all the way to the 61,000 people who are, you know, prosecuting search and rescue missions and things for the Air Force. I would be in
yeah,
the Pentagon with meetings, and believe me, I was advocating, or to Congress because we were congressionally chartered, or to 2 stars and 3 stars are all over the place, for whom we prosecuted the missions and also needed some assistance, even though our funding went through a different stream. So crazy, crazy, opportunity to really learn how to do that well. And I just found that I have to tell you, for folks who say, well, but how do I really do that? Like, I'm worried, I'm scared. How in the world do I step up? Just start small steps. And I'll tell you, again, even if it's a badly wrapped gift that you get back and somebody's screaming at you because you're just not going along. I think it's okay to start making those differences, just okay, I understand you still want to go in that direction. I just wanted to point out what that looked like. Fair enough, move on. And over time, you'll have people say, woof. I literally have had people come back to me, leaders come back and say, I shouldn't have bet against you. To which I always say, oh my God, you're betting against me? Like, why am I here then? And I joke about it and, make a big deal out of it. We laugh about it a lot later. But I have literally said, I should quit betting against you. And I said, I don't think you should have ever started, because I would never bet against you.
yeah,
That would be so unfair. to
Yeah.
stand in the hallway outside the meeting to say, yeah, I kind of agreed in that room. I nodded a lot, but I got out here and said, yeah, wait till she fails, or wait till they fail, or wait till. So it's one of the concepts too that is kind of true to me all the way through, and very much an EOS concept as well, that it's one vision, one voice, one team. And if you're not
Love
at
it. Yeah.
that point, yeah, if you're not at that point, it means that you've got to have a healthy enough, culture, and to have that healthy conflict, to have the conversation. So if at the end of the day you wanted plan B and we're going with plan A, you at least need to feel like you've been heard. And if you've been heard and the team is still heading the other direction, that's your choice then, not theirs. That's your choice. You're following, or if you're not following, get off the team.
Get off.
Like, you don't
Yeah.
get to sit in the middle. It's just not. It's counterproductive for the team, counterproductive for you. Inevitably. And so yeah, so many things come back to vision, traction, or team health. It's amazing.
You know, I guess one of the other things that stands out for me with teams and with CEOs and is trying to do too much. And the conversation we had last time, you seem to have a lot going on. You sort of involved in a lot of great things. How do you balance that, and how do you advise business owners and teams to say no almost to some things? Because I think that's probably a key thing. But how do you handle it yourself, and how do you advise business owners when you're seeing there's too much that they're involved in?
Yeah, well, admittedly, I need help, and so I go to the strategic coach workshops. I'm a strategic coach person, so once a quarter, I'm in a room beating myself up. No, I'm in a room being reminded of really ensuring that I'm making intentional decisions around the work that I'm doing, that I'm putting the right percentage of my time into focused. Whether it's revenue generating, or I always say I might be fundraising, I might be friend raising,
Yeah.
to doing those, as well as that time to kind of catch up and administratively get ready, as much as well as that time to reset. Yeah, Gino Wickman has as well a great set of disciplines, 10 disciplines that have been around for a long time. And he and Rob Dubay, whom you
Yes.
mentioned, it wrote the book Shine, and I'm just a great believer in helping our inner journey
Yeah.
as we're doing our work. And I'd advocate that folks pick up a copy or let me know. I have at least 20 Shine copies right now, and I just
And we'll drop it into the
give
notes
those
as well.
freely.
It's a
Yeah,
great book.
I
Yeah.
give them freely, and I do think that there's a lot of it's back to that entrepreneurial. Watching my dad, he had some balance in that 6 days a week he was that busy. In the winter, sometimes when it got dark out, it might have actually gotten him home earlier. And but on the seventh day, he was at church, trustee of the of the church, or fixing the boiler, or doing whatever you need to do, but also resting and spending time with family and all of that. And so while it was a different balance than I try to strike, it's still making sure that you're balanced. So some of my balance comes from the boards that I'm on, knowing that they're doing great work or supporting things that I believe in. And so whether being on the board of trustees for my alma mater, and is at work, well, sure, but it's also just such a rejuvenating place for me as well. So I think intentionality is important, and having Rob and Gino and Dan and others really
Yeah.
remind me that I have to make those decisions carefully and thoughtfully, and no is a whole sentence.
And you're right. No is a whole sentence. And I think I was going back to Lencioni's six types of genius, and where you find your
Yeah.
energy, what
Yes.
sort of fuels you. And I think of you've got 20 something teams you work with, you're on different boards.
Mhm.
I'm imagining you're probably going to get involved with things that are going on because of the tornado or the hurricane that's just hit where you live at the moment to help people.
Mhm.
But I suppose in part for some it might seem like work, but it's where you draw that energy and being
Yeah.
intentional about what you're doing and knowing what gives you energy. And I really enjoyed Lencioni's book on, or the six types of genius. I think it is, and obviously
Working
Rob's book
Working
is Working
Genius.
Genius. That's it.
Yes, yes.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's also a terrific book. And sometimes with my leadership teams, they'll get to a point where that's a really helpful book for them to see the different levels at which people think and the way that again their energy is best spent. So whether they're wondering or whether they're really going in and galvanizing, I mean, just all those different skills or not skills, different ways in which we work, just the way we work, the way we're
yeah,
wired.
tools and way we are wired, and having a common language to communicate with each other, to understand each other, so we can communicate better, I guess.
Yes,
What
yeah.
what else are you sharing with your teams at the moment from a reading perspective? What else is kind of something aside from I guess the sort of traction books, and we talked about the 10 disciplines, but something else you might be sharing at the moment?
Yeah, we've talked about team health a little bit. So, and you talked about Patrick Lencioni bringing up Working Genius, and there's a number of his. I have his
Yeah,
library, and so I tend to, and because we've just finished the annual season, everyone's redoing their 1 year plans and 3 year pictures and all of that. I'm just about to start next week. I will start 3 weeks solid of of sessions in seeing how the first quarter went. So one book though that really resonates with teams when I spend more time on team health is Patrick Lencioni's book on the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which people may have heard me talk about before. It's so helpful, and it is. Who would have read it if it said 5 functions of a team? So he
yeah,
had to name it 5 dysfunctions, but he really speaks to the how you function in those 5 ways that you need to be able to be, and back to trust, right? Vulnerability based trust needs to be at that leadership team level. And then over time, it rolls through the organization and you help it do that. When you have vulnerability based trust, that trust that is all about us being able to say, ooh, that's on me, or I'm wrong, or maybe I wasn't thinking about that. That trust, that's that hard thing to say. I'm not going to be political and say I'm always right. Heck, I'm not always right. I've been wrong today, I'm sure already.
yeah.
And so it's when you have that, then you can have healthy conflict. Now everybody can step up, and you're not dancing on eggshells, right? You're not expecting to hurt feelings because this is about our team. This isn't about each of us. This is about all of us. And so thinking about how to build that healthy conflict that then builds commitment. Commitment is where you've been heard with healthy conflict, so now you can commit. That gets us accountability and results. And teams will achieve results in spite of themselves sometimes. But oh my goodness, it's I took up tennis a few years ago and just have enjoyed it. And that feeling when you hit something in the sweet spot,
Oh
that
yes,
it just goes farther and faster, and it feels good. Like that's what we
I
want
love that
teams to feel
analogy.
like.
Yeah,
Yeah, that even
yeah,
when they're
just
hit it, even when it's really, really hard, that it just feels good and it makes the celebration, all that much better. And right now, what I would say is with so many things changing and maybe a lot of uncertainty, I had just the coolest blessing a couple weeks ago. One of my clients called, and I'd been thinking about them because in addition to for-profit clients, I have some not-for-profit clients as well. And so organizations really can come in all sizes and shapes and run well on EOS. And so one of the organizations, I know a lot of their funding streams are federal, and I know that they, could be concerned. And so
yeah,
I saw that phone call come in, and I thought, oh, I'm grabbing this call, but I'm dreading this call a little bit. And I answered the phone, and the CEO said, "Hey, Amy, I just wanted to check in with you. As we're rolling through the organization, this leadership and management, you can teach us so well. And I know you've told us it's ours to teach, but I really want you to come in and do it." And I said, "I'd love to do that
love
if
it.
all your
Yeah,
leadership team members are in the room too." So they're all there, so they're showing, and maybe they even pop up and teach a little bit of it with me. And she's like, "Fine, that's great, right?" So we're conducting this transaction that I never expected, and sure, I'll be out there. And then I said, "So how's it going?" And she said, "Oh, I wanted to tell you this." She said, "Before you and before EOS, we would be just a disaster, right? We would be spiraling around right now because we would be wondering what in the world to do. But you know what we did, Amy? We thought about it. We put all our issues on the issues list. We've solved the things that we should solve. We've got the rest, there. And we're just going to continue following our vision and executing on
Oh,
our
I love it.
plan. And
Yeah.
words just,
And
melted
it's
my
not the
heart.
first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
Whether it was companies who went through COVID or
Mhm.
back in 2008 that were running EOS, they were more confident, more cohesive, and able to navigate these big challenges that we face and to navigate uncertainty. So it's just,
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah,
It's such a wonderful feeling, and it doesn't happen overnight. It
no,
takes some time.
it
You
takes
have to
time.
roll it through, but
It's
and
tough.
people
Just
have to be
it's tough.
vulnerable.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so for everyone who thinks, "Oh my goodness," that moment where you make a decision not to say something or not to share because that might help them, but it's going to make it look bad on you. Hey, do it.
yeah,
I will say, even if I like stepped away from that company because I wasn't willing to go along with something that wasn't what we said we were doing. And when I left, I mean, they threw a big party for me. I'd been there 20 years. This wasn't like an overnight thought. I'd been very loyal, very much there. But I've got to tell you, I cashed out my stock and options, and not long after that, everybody else came back and started talking to me about, what did you know that we didn't know? And I said, nothing. I told you all. This is what we should do. So please know that it's hard, and it
yeah.
may, feel like a setback, but those setbacks are small compared to the opportunities ahead. So, be brave,
Do
and
the work.
and
Be
yeah,
brave.
I always
Put in the work.
say, you can only be so courageous, but um, you know, you're not feeling like actually, let me fix that. I always say you can only be so confident, but when you feel like you don't have the confidence, then turn on the courage button and just go. So,
Love it. So I've got one last question for you, I guess. The name of the show is The Freedom Experience. And as I told you, it's one of
mhm.
my core values. What does freedom mean for you, um, Amy? What does that word mean for you?
Well, one thing I'll say is I never think about it as freedom from things. I think about it as freedom for things, to go things. So freedom for me is that ability to make the choices that are best for me, my family, my country, my company, my organization, whatever it is. So for me, it's being able, in some ways, I got freedom through education.
Yes.
That having more and more education helped me to see and experience more and more and more. So I think freedom also, back to courage for a second, that sometimes when you're the most courageous, you realize it is freeing. It's freeing to be able to feel as though you really can, make your choices and move forward. So yeah, so freedom for me, my dad fought in the army in World War II. My brother was in the Air Force during Vietnam. He enlisted during Vietnam. I just think that people, we tend to think of those things as supporting freedom, but as well, I've volunteered and performed search and rescue for 40 plus years. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping I'm helping freedom, in the United States, for folks who want to go up in small planes and do all the things they want to do, and keeping that as safe as we can. So I think freedom is also enabling others to have theirs.
That's
I
beautiful.
think that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person at Small Giants in what we're
Yes.
3 weeks away. Can't wait to see you and spend some time with you. And thank you so much for coming on and just sharing some of your wisdom.